I have lived long enough to understand that some stories never truly end. They linger quietly, hidden behind ordinary days, waiting for the moment you can finally face them again. My name is Helen Lopez, and I'm 72 now, living in a small sun-washed house in Laredo, Texas, where the desert wind hums through the lemon trees. This place has seen me grow from a barefoot child to a grandmother haunted by memories I once tried to forget. What I'm about to share began decades ago. A story about love, fate, and the curse that ran through my family's bloodline. I was born in 1953 in a modest home tucked in the old Cerro neighborhood. My parents, Robert and Maria Lopez, were simple but proud people. Father crafted furniture with his hands, shaping each piece of wood like it carried a soul. Mother spent long hours at her sewing machine, stitching lace, ribbons, and dreams into every dress she made for others. Our house smelled of wood shavings and fabric dye, scents that still cling to my memory more vividly than perfume. I was the second daughter, quiet and observant, often following my older sister Josephine everywhere. We would walk to school together, our hands clasped, our laughter echoing against the cracked walls of the neighborhood. We didn't have much, but our home was rich with something far greater: affection. Evenings were filled with my father's stories, told under the glow of a small lamp, and my mother's soft humming that wrapped the night in peace. But every family has a shadow that it tries to hide. Ours was whispered only when the grown-ups thought we children were asleep, a shadow that took the form of my great-grandfather Antonio Lopez. He had died long before I was born, yet his story remained alive in our walls. They said he had been a brilliant man who lost his mind, that he went days without sleep, spoke to people no one else could see, and believed his own sister had been replaced by a creature disguised as her. One night, driven by those delusions, he tried to hang her. My grandmother used to whisper with trembling lips, "Thank God it skipped a generation." When I was young, those tales felt like bedtime horrors meant to keep us obedient. I never imagined that the same blood, that same fragile thread of madness, could one day reach me through time. Life went on peacefully. I graduated high school at 18 in the early 70s, when hope still danced easily in the hearts of the young. I got my first job as a secretary at an accounting firm downtown. The office was small but busy, filled with the clatter of typewriters and the faint scent of ink and coffee. I was proud of my work and of the independence that came with it, even if my paycheck barely covered new sandals and an occasional lipstick. And that was where I met Felipe, the man who would forever change my life. He was new to town, freshly graduated from a university in Dallas, full of promise and quiet confidence. He had dark hair, shoulders that seemed built for strength, and eyes the color of honey warmed by sunlight. The first time I saw him, he was juggling a stack of files that looked ready to collapse. I stood up to help him, and when our hands brushed, a spark ran through me so sharp that I forgot to breathe. He smiled in that awkward, charming way that would later become so familiar and said, "I'm Felipe, the new accountant." I managed a nervous laugh and replied, "Helen, welcome to the chaos." For weeks, our conversations were polite exchanges in hallways, shared smiles over the coffee pot, and little glances that spoke more than words. He took exactly 3 weeks to ask me out, to the movies of all places, to see Love Story. I said yes before he could even finish his sentence. We dated for 2 years. Ours was a quiet, old-fashioned courtship. Sunday picnics, walks under the fading orange light of Texas sunsets, evenings spent talking on the porch while my parents peeked through the curtains. Felipe was gentle, thoughtful, never the kind to rush or raise his voice. I knew I loved him not because he swept me off my feet, but because he made the ground beneath me feel steady. In 1975, he asked my father for permission to marry me. I remember my father's eyes when they came out of the carpentry room after talking. He looked both proud and tearful, as though giving me away meant giving away a piece of his heart. Felipe knelt in front of everyone and asked softly, "Helen, will you marry me?" Of course, I said yes. Our wedding took place 6 months later in a small church, its white walls glowing against the afternoon sun. My dress was hand-sewn by my mother and godmother, delicate lace, tiny pearls, and a modest train that made me feel like royalty. Felipe wore a navy blue suit that wasn't new but looked perfect on him. When I walked down the aisle, he had tears in his eyes. Later, he told me, "When I saw you that day, I thought my heart would burst." After the ceremony, our families gathered in the fellowship hall my father had decorated himself. There was music, laughter, and a sense that we were stepping into something sacred. Our first home was a 2-bedroom apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but we made it ours. My curtains brightened the windows, his laughter filled the rooms, and our dreams hung in the air like sunlight through thin fabric. Felipe worked long hours while I started baking cakes and pastries for neighbors. Slowly, people began to order from me, and our modest kitchen turned into a sweet-scented workshop. Those early years were the kind of happiness that makes you hold your breath, afraid that joy that pure cannot last. At night, lying beside Felipe, we would talk about our plans. He wanted to open his own accounting firm someday. I dreamed of owning a little bakery. And together, we wished for one thing most of all: a child. Month after month, we waited. Each time hope faded, Felipe would hold me close and whisper, "It will happen when it's meant to." And he was right. In the summer of 1977, I found out I was pregnant. That evening, I cooked his favorite meal and hid a pair of tiny crocheted booties inside a small gift box. When he opened it, he froze, his eyes darting from the booties to me, and then tears welled up. He lifted me off the ground in a joyful spin that filled the house with laughter. It was the happiest night of our lives, but happiness, I've learned, is a fragile thing. We didn't know then that the same bloodline that gave us life also carried something darker, something that would one day return through our own son. Those 9 months of waiting were the most tender season of my life. My body changed in gentle ways, carrying a miracle that felt too good to be real. Felipe was the kind of husband every woman prays for. He'd rush home from work with fruit I'd suddenly craved that day, or massage my swollen feet while joking that I was glowing brighter than the Texas sun. He even read books about child development and decorated the baby's room with the enthusiasm of a boy building his first fort. In the 5th month, the doctor told us we were having a boy. Felipe's face lit up like he'd just won the world. He proudly announced to everyone in the neighborhood, "His name will be Michael Robert, and he's going to be a great man someday." His joy was contagious. The whole family started preparing gifts before the baby was even born. My father crafted a crib from polished oak, smooth as glass, while my mother sewed soft sheets with tiny clouds embroidered along the edges. My aunts made little blankets, each one stitched with love. I often stood in that small blue-painted room, my hands resting on my belly, imagining the sound of our child's laughter filling the air. Felipe would talk to him through my belly every night, whispering promises about fishing trips, football lessons, and bedtime stories. "You'll be the best father in the world," I told him once. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Only because I already have the best wife." Our son arrived on a cold January morning in 1978, after a long and exhausting night. The first time I saw him, I felt my world pause. He was so small, yet so perfect. A head full of dark hair, cheeks pink as roses, and tiny fists that grasped my finger like he never wanted to let go. Felipe cried openly beside me, whispering, "He's perfect, Helen. Thank you." We took him home 3 days later, and life became something entirely new. The nights were long, filled with the cries of hunger and the soft rhythm of a rocking chair, but even exhaustion felt sacred. We took turns waking up, warming bottles, and singing lullabies. Sometimes Felipe would come home from work and go straight to the crib, lifting our son with the gentleness of a man holding his entire world. Every first felt monumental. The first smile, the first laugh, the first time he grabbed our fingers. Felipe recorded everything with the second-hand film camera he'd saved up for. On weekends, he would project the footage onto the living room wall, and we'd sit side by side watching our little boy grow before our eyes. Mike, as we soon began calling him, grew into a bright, curious child. Even before his first birthday, he was trying to form words, babbling as if language were a puzzle he was eager to solve. By the time he turned 2, he was speaking in full sentences. People who visited our home would say, "This child has an old soul." Felipe would beam, his pride overflowing. Those years were golden. We had our little routines: breakfast together before Felipe left for work, afternoon walks through the park, lazy Sundays filled with music and homemade sweets. We didn't have much, but what we had was more precious than wealth. Our apartment was small, but to us, it felt like a palace of love. By 1981, when Mike was 3, life gave us another reason to celebrate. Felipe had been promoted to manager at the firm, and my baking business had become well known in our community. Neighbors and local cafes ordered cakes every week, and my name began to circulate beyond the neighborhood. With our combined income, we finally bought a modest house in Vista Hills, a white one-story home with a porch and a backyard shaded by a lemon tree. That house became the stage for our happiest memories. I filled the windows with flower pots. Felipe installed a swing for Mike, and every corner carried something we had built together. It was a home born of effort and affection. Mike started preschool that same year. I remember his first day so vividly. His hair neatly combed, his uniform perfectly pressed, and a lunchbox packed with sandwiches, fruit, and one of my cupcakes. He looked so small, but so proud, marching through the school gates while I stood at the fence trying not to cry. He thrived there. His teachers often told me, "Mrs. Lopez, your son is remarkable. He learns faster than any child we've seen." By the age of 4, he was reading short words and asking questions that even adults stumbled over. Felipe would say proudly, "That's my boy. He's going to change the world." We lived in a rhythm of peace, the kind that feels so steady, you start to believe it's unbreakable. Summers were for visiting Felipe's parents in Dallas, winters for decorating the house together. We didn't take fancy trips or buy expensive things, but we were content. Sometimes in the evenings, Felipe would play the guitar while Mike danced barefoot on the rug, laughing so hard he'd fall over. Then came that summer afternoon in 1983, a memory I can never forget. We had gone to Galveston Beach. The sky was a clear blue and the ocean seemed endless. Felipe had gone to buy popsicles while Mike built small sand castles near the water's edge. A slightly older boy came running and deliberately destroyed everything he had built, laughing as he did. I rushed forward expecting tears, but Mike didn't cry. He stood there quietly, his little hands clenched. Then, with a calmness that frightened me, he said, "You'll regret that." Before I could react, he scooped a handful of wet sand and flung it into the other boy's face. The boy screamed, rubbing his eyes in pain. I pulled Mike aside, horrified. "Why did you do that?" He looked confused, almost dazed. "I don't know, Mom," he said softly. "It felt like someone else did it." At the time, I dismissed it as childish anger, a momentary lapse. But sometimes, in the quiet of night, I would remember the strange tone in his voice and the eerie calm that came before it. It reminded me of those family stories I had long buried deep inside. Still, the years passed peacefully. Mike grew into a polite, bright boy who loved books, puzzles, and long talks with his father. He was the pride of our lives, a golden child in every sense. By 1985, when he turned 7, Felipe took a leap of faith and opened his own accounting business, Frontier Accounting. It was a small firm at first, run with a college friend, but it prospered quickly. Felipe worked long nights, determined to build something lasting for our family. I supported him in every way I could, baking late into the night and caring for Mike with the same devotion I had when he was an infant. And our son adored his father. He'd visit the office on weekends, sitting in Felipe's chair and pretending to answer calls. "When I grow up," he said once, his eyes bright with pride, "I'll work with you, Dad. We'll be partners." Felipe laughed, tousling his hair. "Then it'll be Lopez and Son." Those words would echo in my heart for years to come, even when laughter had long left our home. We thought our story had found its forever peace, but fate was already preparing its storm. The first signs were quiet, too quiet to recognize until it was far too late. By the time Mike reached his teenage years, our world seemed solid, almost invincible. Felipe's business had flourished beyond our expectations, and we were finally living the life we had only dared to dream about when we were young. We had a stable home, loyal friends, and a son who seemed destined for greatness. Mike had always been gifted, not just smart, but almost unnervingly perceptive. He absorbed information like a sponge, spoke like someone years beyond his age, and could hold conversations about science, philosophy, or politics with an ease that startled adults. Teachers admired him, neighbors adored him, and Felipe glowed with pride every time someone said, "Your boy is something special." At home, he was quiet but affectionate. He'd kiss my cheek before bed and always helped me with groceries without being asked. He didn't give us the usual teenage attitude that other parents complained about. If anything, he was almost too well-behaved. But as I've learned, perfection rarely lasts untouched. When Mike turned 15, Felipe decided it was time for him to start learning about real life, to understand the business that had built our family's foundation. So on weekends and school breaks, Mike joined him at the office. He loved it from the start. He'd sit at one of the small desks, watching his father balance the books, learning the logic of numbers. It was remarkable how quickly he picked up complex accounting systems. Felipe used to say, "He's already better at this than I was at his age." I remember one particular Saturday. Felipe had gone to check something in the storage room, leaving Mike and me alone in the office. I found him sitting perfectly still, staring at a spreadsheet on the computer. The screen flickered softly, casting pale light across his face. When I asked what he was doing, he didn't look up. "The numbers are moving," he said in a low voice. "They talk to each other like they're alive." I laughed softly, thinking he was joking. "Then you have a great imagination, sweetheart." But he didn't smile. He just blinked slowly and whispered, "Sometimes they talk to me too." I brushed it off then. I wish I hadn't. Around that same time, small changes began to surface. He slept less, spending long nights hunched over notebooks, filling pages with symbols and equations I couldn't understand. His once neat handwriting became wild and uneven, as though written by someone in a hurry to escape his own thoughts. His appetite faded too. I'd make his favorite meals: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, flan for dessert. But he barely touched them. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd shrug and say he wasn't hungry. "I just think better on an empty stomach," he'd add, giving me that distant smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I tried to convince myself it was just part of adolescence, a boy changing, finding his place in the world. Felipe agreed. "It's normal," he said. "He's growing up. Don't worry so much, but mothers know. We always do. It wasn't just his sleep or eating habits. It was his silence." Mike began keeping to himself, locking his door for hours, avoiding friends who once filled the house with laughter. When I'd knock to ask if he was all right, his replies were curt. "I'm studying, Mom. I just need space." One night, when I went to bring him tea, I caught him off guard. His desk was covered in torn pages and strange drawings, lines, circles, and numbers arranged like codes. In the center of one page was a large eye drawn in black ink, surrounded by words I didn't recognize. He quickly swept the papers aside. "You shouldn't be in here," he said sharply. His tone froze me. It wasn't anger like a teenager snapping at his mother. It was fear, as though I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. From that night on, I started to sense the house changing. The laughter faded. The rhythm that had once carried us so easily began to stumble. Felipe and I would talk in whispers after Mike went to bed. "He's just under pressure," Felipe said again and again. "He'll be fine." Then came the day that shattered denial. It was a Sunday afternoon in the spring of 1995. I went to his room to call him for lunch and found the window open wide, his notebooks scattered across the floor. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, his gaze locked on something invisible in the corner of the room. "Mike?" I said softly. He didn't blink. "Do you see him?" "See who?" "The man in the hat." A chill crawled down my spine. The sunlight poured through the curtains, warm and harmless. Yet the air around us felt suddenly heavy. "There's no one here." "Sweetheart," I said, trying to stay calm. He smiled faintly, still staring into the empty corner. "He doesn't show himself to everyone, only to me. He says you and Dad can't be trusted. That night I couldn't sleep." The stories of my great-grandfather Antonio came rushing back. The same whispers, the same shadowed figure he claimed followed him. I prayed it was only a passing delusion, something that would fade with rest and time. But it didn't fade. Within weeks, Mike's teachers began calling. They said he was acting strangely, sometimes withdrawn, sometimes overly excited. His grades fell sharply, and he was caught muttering to himself during class. One counselor suggested we seek help. "It could be depression," she said gently. "Or maybe something deeper. You should talk to a professional." It was the word psychiatrist that tore Felipe's patience. "My son is not crazy," he said. But I insisted. A mother's instinct is rarely wrong. The day of the appointment, Mike refused to go. He locked himself in the bathroom, shouting that we were trying to trick him. "You want to send me away?" he screamed. "Just like you did with him," I froze. "With who, Mike?" "With the one who came before. The crazy one. He had never heard that story. We never told him about Antonio." When Felipe finally managed to open the door, Mike's expression had changed completely. The anger was gone. He smiled softly and said, "Okay, let's go. Maybe the doctor can help." That ride to the psychiatrist's office felt endless. I sat in the front seat, staring at the reflection of my son in the rearview mirror. His eyes, once warm and golden like his father's, now looked far away, glassy, as though he was listening to something none of us could hear. And in that moment, I realized the terrible truth. The curse I had once dismissed as legend had found its way into my child. The diagnosis that followed tore our world apart. We thought it would bring answers. Instead, it opened a door we could never close again. I remember the smell of the clinic that day. Sterile and cold, like the air had been scrubbed of emotion. We sat in the waiting room surrounded by old magazines and a faint hum from a broken ceiling light. Felipe tried to appear calm, but his foot tapped restlessly against the floor. Mike sat between us, quiet, eyes fixed on a point far away, as if watching something invisible. When the nurse called his name, my stomach tightened. We followed her into a narrow office where a gray-haired doctor waited behind an old mahogany desk. His name was Dr. Johnson, the only psychiatrist in town. He looked kind but tired, the way people look after years of hearing too many broken stories. At first, Mike was polite, even cheerful. He answered the doctor's questions smoothly, his favorite subjects, his school performance, how things were at home. I started to believe that maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe he was just going through a phase, like Felipe kept saying. But then the doctor began asking about the voices. Mike tilted his head slightly and said, "They're not voices, not exactly. They're more like numbers. They glow, they hum. And sometimes they speak in patterns that make sense only to me." The doctor asked him to elaborate. That was when Mike began to speak quickly, his words tumbling over one another like a stream breaking its banks. He talked about messages and television static, colors attached to numbers, and a man with a black hat who appeared in corners when he tried to sleep. Felipe squeezed my hand under the table. I couldn't breathe. Then, just as suddenly, Mike went quiet. His gaze shifted to the far corner of the room, his body stiffened, and he whispered, "He's here." "Who's here, Michael?" Dr. Johnson asked softly. "The man in the hat," he replied. "He says you shouldn't trust me." "He says you're part of them." Silence filled the room. Even the hum of the ceiling light seemed to stop. That was the moment I knew something inside my son had slipped away. Somewhere unreachable. Somewhere words and reason couldn't follow. When the session ended, Dr. Johnson asked to speak with us privately. Mike waited outside, humming to himself in the hallway. I will never forget the doctor's expression as he spoke. It was the look of someone delivering a truth no parent ever wants to hear. Your son is showing strong signs of a schizophrenic spectrum disorder, he said carefully. He's experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations, delusional thinking, and disorganized speech. The age fits the common onset. In young men, it often appears between 16 and 20. Felipe shook his head as if refusing the words themselves. But he was fine just months ago. He's brilliant. I understand, Dr. Johnson interrupted gently. Schizophrenia can emerge suddenly after years of normal behavior. It doesn't mean he's lost forever. With treatment, there's hope for stabilization, but it will require time, patience, and continuous care. He prescribed medication to manage the symptoms and suggested we consider follow-up evaluations in Dallas, where there were specialists experienced in early-onset psychosis. I don't remember much of the drive home. Felipe gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. I just stared out the window, watching the desert blur by. Every mile felt like a descent into something deeper, something none of us were ready for. At home, Mike behaved as if nothing had happened. He joked with us over dinner, helped me wash dishes, even asked his father about the firm. If I hadn't been in that office hours earlier, I might have believed everything was fine. But there was a distance in his laughter, a hollowness, like an echo in an empty room. That night, after Mike went to bed, Felipe and I sat on the porch in silence. The stars stretched wide over the dark sky. I could hear the faint hum of insects in the grass and the occasional passing truck on the road. Felipe finally spoke. He's not crazy. He can't be. There must be another explanation. Stress, exhaustion, something. I turned to him, my eyes wet. Felipe, you heard him. The doctor didn't say he might have it. He said he does. We can't ignore that. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm not ignoring it. I can't accept that this is our son's future. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be fine. But I couldn't lie. Not when my heart already knew this disease would test every piece of who we were. In the weeks that followed, Mike began his treatment. The pills dulled his energy but also quieted the chaos. He slept through the nights again. He ate full meals and spoke with more clarity. For a brief, fragile moment, it felt like the darkness had been pushed back. He even returned to school, where teachers noted he seemed calmer, though quieter than before. Felipe dared to hope again. See? He said one evening as we watched Mike reading on the couch. He's getting better. I wanted to believe it too. But every time I caught Mike staring blankly into space, I felt that same cold dread. Sometimes his lips would move soundless, as if speaking to someone I couldn't see. When I asked him once what he was thinking, he replied simply, "They're quieter now. Mom, the medicine keeps them far away." I smiled weakly. "That's good, sweetheart." He nodded, but then added, "But they're waiting. I can feel them waiting." Those words haunted me. By early spring, Dr. Johnson suggested we visit Dallas to see a specialist named Dr. Anthony Roberts, known for his work with young patients. Felipe was reluctant, but I insisted. "If there's a chance to help him, we take it," I said. Mike seemed almost eager for the trip. "Maybe the new doctor will understand," he said with an unsettling calm. "He'll know what the man in the hat really means." We left Laredo one gray morning, the road stretching endlessly ahead. Felipe drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Mike hummed softly in the back seat, his gaze drifting between the clouds and his reflection in the window. At that moment, I realized something simple but devastating. We weren't just driving to Dallas. We were crossing the line between the life we had and the one we would never get back. Dallas would bring new doctors, new hope and new fear. For sometimes, the closer you get to understanding an illness, the more you uncover the depths of what it truly takes from you. The morning we arrived in Dallas, the air felt heavier, almost solemn. The city rose around us in silver towers and crowded streets, So unlike our quiet corner of Laredo. Felipe drove without speaking, gripping the wheel as though holding on to the last threads of normalcy. In the back seat, Mike sat unusually calm, his gaze fixed on the buildings flashing past the window. Our appointment was scheduled at a clinic in University Park, an elegant neighborhood lined with oak trees and wide sidewalks. The building was modern and bright, far from the small, aging office we'd seen back home. Inside, the walls were pale blue, the chairs soft, and a faint scent of lavender filled the air. It was almost too peaceful, like a place trying hard to convince people that pain could be cured. Dr. Anthony Roberts greeted us himself, a man in his 50s, tall, with gentle eyes that spoke of patience. He shook Mike's hand first, not ours, and said, "You must be Michael. I'm very glad you came." There was warmth in his tone, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of relief. The consultation lasted nearly 2 hours. First, the doctor spoke to Mike alone. Felipe and I sat in the waiting area, listening to the quiet ticking of the clock. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. When Dr. Roberts finally called us in, I studied his face for signs of hope. He smiled faintly, but his expression was heavy with understanding. "I won't hide the truth," he said gently. "Your son's symptoms are consistent with paranoid schizophrenia. The hallucinations, delusions, and fragmented speech. They match the pattern I've seen many times before." I had prepared myself for those words, yet hearing them out loud shattered something inside me. Felipe, however, couldn't contain himself. "But he looks fine," he said desperately. "He talks, he smiles. He's not dangerous." "He's not—" The doctor raised his hand softly. "Schizophrenia doesn't always look like the movies, Mr. Lopez. It's not about madness or violence. It's about perception. Your son experiences the world differently. What seems unreal to us feels absolutely real to him." He explained that the illness might have a hereditary component, and though I tried to keep my face calm, my heart froze. I thought of Antonio, my great-grandfather, the man whose shadow still haunted our family's whispers. Dr. Roberts continued, his voice low but firm. "Michael's intelligence works against him. His mind builds patterns, connections, explanations, all to make sense of what he's seeing and hearing. The delusions become more convincing because his brain is so sharp. Can he recover?" I asked, almost afraid of the answer. "With the right treatment, many patients live fulfilling lives," he replied. "But it will require discipline, daily medication, therapy, and constant monitoring. There will be good days and bad days. The goal isn't to erase the illness, but to manage it." He adjusted Mike's medication, switching to newer drugs that, he said, had fewer side effects. He also recommended regular therapy and suggested we join a family support group. "Schizophrenia doesn't just affect the person who has it," he said. "It reshapes the entire family." We thanked him and left, carrying a stack of prescriptions and pamphlets that felt heavier than any burden I had ever known. On the drive home, none of us spoke. Mike sat quietly watching the clouds through the window. I turned to him once and asked softly, "How do you feel, sweetheart?" He smiled faintly. "Better, I think." The doctor listens. He doesn't think I'm crazy. I reached back to squeeze his hand. "No one thinks that, my love. You're still you." He nodded, but his next words chilled me. He said the man in the hat isn't real, but he's wrong. "The man told me he'll come with us. He doesn't want to be left behind." Felipe's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. He said nothing, and neither did I. We just drove, praying that the silence could somehow swallow the fear. At home, we tried to build a new routine. Mike's medicine schedule became the anchor of our days. Morning pills, evening pills, weekly appointments. I kept charts on the fridge marking each dose, each mood change, each quiet night that felt like progress. For a few weeks, it worked. Mike seemed steadier. He even laughed again. He'd sit on the porch with me, sipping lemonade, talking about returning to school. "I think I can catch up," he said one evening. "I don't want to fall behind my friends." Felipe smiled at him across the table. You're stronger than you know, son. We're proud of you. But the illusion of peace never lasts long when the foundation beneath it is cracked. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I noticed something strange. A bottle of pills on Mike's dresser was nearly full, though I had given him one every night for weeks. My heart sank. I checked the other bottles. The same. When I confronted him gently, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with tired eyes and said, "They make me feel like a ghost. When I take them, the world turns gray. The colors disappear." "Mike, you need them," I insisted. "They help keep the voices away." He shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. Maybe the voices aren't the problem. Maybe they're trying to protect me." Those words echoed through me like a cold wind. That night, Felipe and I argued for the first time in months. He wanted to be firm, to threaten consequences. I wanted to reason, to plead. "He's not defying us," I told him. "He's drowning." "He doesn't even know it," Felipe sighed, rubbing his temples. "Then how do we save him, Helen? How do we fight something we can't even see?" I didn't have an answer. The following morning, Mike came to breakfast smiling, as if nothing had happened. "I'll take the pills, Mom," he said, swallowing them with his juice while I watched. He hugged me afterward, his voice gentle. "I know you're just trying to help." It felt like victory, until I found the pills later, hidden inside a hollowed-out book. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, the house silent around me, and wondered how a family could lose someone without losing them at all. Mike was still here, breathing, speaking, existing, but already fading behind the veil of his illness, and I knew then that we stood on the edge of something terrible. A storm was gathering again, quiet but certain, and we were too small to stop it. Within weeks, that storm would break. And when it did, it would not only take away my son's fragile stability, it would begin to tear apart the very heart of our family. There are moments that divide life into before and after. You don't see them coming. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary days, and by the time you realize what's happening, the world you knew is already gone. For us, that moment came one warm evening in May 1995. It had been nearly 2 months since our visit to Dr. Roberts. Mike was attending school again and meeting with Dr. Johnson once a week back in Laredo. On the surface, things looked almost normal. He slept through the night, ate better, and even joked occasionally, though his laughter always seemed a little forced. I let myself believe we were winning, that medicine, love, and prayer were enough. I was wrong. That evening, I went to his room to collect laundry. The window was open, curtains fluttering in the dry Texas breeze. On his bed lay one of his notebooks, half open. I shouldn't have looked. Every parent tells themselves that privacy matters. But something drew me closer. The pages were filled with numbers and symbols arranged in strange spirals, surrounded by sentences written over and over again. The man in the hat knows. The numbers are watching. My throat went dry. When I turned, Mike was standing in the doorway, his face shadowed by the fading light. "Why are you looking at that?" he asked quietly. "I was just picking up laundry," I said softly, closing the notebook. "You left it open, sweetheart." He stepped forward slowly. "You read it." "No, Mike, don't lie," he snapped. His voice wasn't loud, but there was something unfamiliar in it, something hollow and sharp. "He told me you'd start snooping. He said you'd try to stop me. Who told you that?" "The man in the hat." Before I could respond, Felipe called from the hallway, asking if everything was all right. Mike flinched like he'd heard something unbearable. He covered his ears and shouted, "Stop whispering about me! I can hear you even when you think I can't." Felipe rushed in, his face pale with shock. He tried to calm him, speaking gently, but Mike pushed him away with surprising strength. "You're not my father," he cried. "He said you were replaced." The look in his eyes will never leave me. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was terror, the kind that comes when your mind can no longer separate truth from illusion. Felipe tried again, his voice steady but firm. "Mike, listen to me. I'm your father. No one has replaced me. You're just tired. Let's sit down and stay away from me, Mike yelled, his breathing fast and shallow. He grabbed a lamp from the table and threw it across the room. It shattered against the wall, scattering glass across the carpet. I screamed his name, my voice drowned in the chaos. Felipe moved forward, trying to hold him, but Mike swung at him wildly, hitting his shoulder. In that split second, I saw something I never thought I'd see. My husband recoiling from his own son, not out of anger, but heartbreak. It took both of us to restrain him until the storm passed. He collapsed on the floor, sobbing, his hands covering his face. "They won't stop talking," he whispered. "They say you're poisoning me. They say I have to leave before it's too late." Felipe looked at me, his eyes glistening. "Call Dr. Johnson." The doctor arrived within the hour. He examined Mike, who had retreated into a cold, distant silence, staring blankly at the floor. When we stepped outside the room, Dr. Johnson spoke in a low voice. "He's in an acute psychotic episode. The delusions and paranoia have taken full hold. He's refusing medication and becoming aggressive. For his safety and yours, he needs to be hospitalized." The word hospitalized echoed like a thunderclap in my mind. "No," I said instinctively. "He's just confused. We can manage him here." Dr. Johnson's face softened with empathy, but his tone left no room for debate. "You've done all you can, Mrs. Lopez. This isn't about punishment. It's about stabilization. He needs constant care and supervision now. There's a facility in Dallas, St. Luke's Psychiatric Hospital, with an excellent youth unit. He'll be treated with dignity and compassion." Felipe put an arm around me as my knees weakened. "Do we have to do it right away?" he asked. Dr. Johnson nodded. "Tonight. He's volatile, and waiting could make things worse." That night is a blur in my memory. Flashes of movement, the sound of papers rustling, suitcases being packed. Mike was calm again, almost eerily so, when we told him he would be going to a hospital to get some rest. He looked at me with quiet eyes and said, "You're lying." "No, sweetheart. It's just for a few weeks," I whispered. "They'll help you feel better." He smiled faintly. "He told me you'd send me away." Felipe's hands trembled as he helped him into the car. The drive to Dallas was long and silent. Mike sat in the back seat, humming softly, staring at the stars through the window. Every few minutes he'd whisper something under his breath, words I couldn't catch, perhaps not meant for us at all. At the hospital, we signed the papers with shaking hands. Nurses guided him gently toward his room. When they asked us to say our goodbyes, he clung to my hand with desperate strength. "Please don't leave me here," he begged. "I'll take the pills, I promise. I'll be good." My heart cracked open. "It's just for a short while," I managed to say. "We love you, Mike. You're not alone." But as they led him down the hall, his voice changed. "You're not my parents," he shouted. "You're imposters." Felipe turned away, tears streaming silently down his face. The drive home without him felt endless. The silence in the car was unbearable, heavy with grief, guilt, and exhaustion. I kept my hands clasped together, whispering prayers to a God I wasn't sure was listening anymore. When we reached home, everything looked the same. The lemon tree, the porch light, the half-finished dinner still on the stove. Yet nothing was the same. Our house felt hollow, stripped of its heartbeat. That night, as we sat on the porch beneath the quiet stars, Felipe spoke in a voice I barely recognized. "We did the right thing," he said. "We had to," I nodded, but my heart didn't agree. The right thing isn't supposed to hurt this much. In the days that followed, the silence of our home became unbearable. We clung to hope that the hospital would bring healing, unaware that what waited ahead would test us more than anything before. The first time we visited St. Luke's Psychiatric Hospital, I had to remind myself to breathe. The building stood on the edge of Dallas like a monument to sorrow, tall, pale, and surrounded by iron gates that looked more like protection for the outside world than for the people within. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. The walls were painted a soft blue, the kind that tries to calm you but fails. I watched nurses in white shoes glide through the halls like ghosts, their faces calm but unreadable. A kind woman at the reception led us to the family visitation room. It was simple. 2 couches, a few chairs, a small table with magazines no one seemed to read. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, filling the silence. When they brought Mike in, my heart nearly gave out. He looked thinner, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights, his movements slower. His hair was shorter, unevenly cut as if done by someone impatient. He wore a gray hospital sweatshirt with his name stitched in black letters across the chest, Michael L. But when he saw us, his lips trembled into a small smile. "Mom, Dad." I rushed to hug him, and for a moment he hugged me back. I felt his ribs through the fabric. "My sweet boy," I whispered. "We missed you so much." Felipe stood close, his hand resting gently on Mike's shoulder. "How are they treating you, son?" Mike shrugged. "They watch me all the time, even when I sleep." "They're just making sure you're safe," I said softly. He nodded, looking past me toward the window where sunlight filtered through thick bars. "The man in the hat doesn't come here in," he said after a moment. "Maybe he doesn't like hospitals." I glanced at Felipe, who lowered his eyes. We didn't know what to say, and silence wrapped around us like a fragile shell. The nurse gently reminded us that visiting hours were short. When we said goodbye, Mike's voice cracked. "Can I come home soon?" "Soon," I said, forcing a smile. "When the doctors say you're ready." As we walked back to the car, Felipe stayed silent, but I saw the pain in the way he clenched his jaw. "He's improving," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "He's talking." He smiled. He nodded once. "Yes, but he's not the same." Over the next weeks, our visits became routine. Every Saturday, we'd make the long drive from Laredo to Dallas, a journey that felt longer each time. Mike was often distant during those visits, but occasionally, the boy we once knew would flicker through. One afternoon, he asked for one of my chocolate cakes, his favorite since childhood. I baked it the night before, wrapping it carefully. When I gave it to him, he took a small bite, smiled faintly, and said, "It tastes like home." Those 4 words carried me through the darkest nights. The doctors said he was showing positive signs. The new medication seemed to be working, stabilizing his mood and quieting his delusions. He began participating in art therapy, drawing landscapes and faces that, while haunting, showed detail and depth. One drawing caught my attention, a field of wheat under a stormy sky, a single figure standing at the edge wearing a wide-brimmed hat. I asked him who it was. He smiled softly and said, "He doesn't scare me anymore." For the first time, I dared to hope. Dr. Roberts called us one evening to update us on his progress. "Michael is responding well," he said. "If this continues, he may be ready for supervised discharge in a few months. But you must prepare yourselves. Recovery isn't linear. There will be setbacks." Felipe and I sat in the kitchen, holding hands across the table, the phone between us like a fragile lifeline. "We'll do whatever it takes," I said. After the call, Felipe leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. "Maybe this is it," he whispered. "Maybe we're getting him back." For a moment, I let myself imagine it. Mike coming home, sitting with us on the porch again, the house filled with laughter instead of silence. I could almost smell the scent of lemon blossoms in the yard, hear the sound of Felipe's guitar, see our son's smile framed by evening light. But hope can be cruel when you hold it too tightly. In late August, during one of our visits, I noticed something different. Mike was quieter, his gaze unfocused. When I asked if he was all right, he said he was fine, but his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Later, the nurse pulled me aside. "He's been having nightmares again," she said softly. "Talking in his sleep. Sometimes about you and your husband. What does he say?" I asked. "He says he wants to come home, but that he's afraid the man in the hat will follow him there." My heart sank. It was as if the illness refused to let go. Always waiting, always whispering. That night, I sat awake in our small hotel room, staring at the city lights outside. Felipe slept beside me, exhausted from the drive. I wanted to believe that medicine could erase this darkness, but deep down, I knew it was only a temporary shield. A few days later, we received a call from Dr. Roberts. "Michael is stable," he said. "We're recommending a trial home visit for the weekend under supervision. It's a chance to see how he handles a familiar environment." I froze. The words home visit filled me with both relief and dread. When we arrived that Friday to bring him home, Mike looked nervous but eager. He carried a small bag with neatly folded clothes and a sketchbook. "Just for 2 nights," he said quietly, as if reminding himself. The drive back to Laredo was quiet. He watched the sky change colors as the miles passed, humming softly. When we pulled into the driveway, he smiled. A real warm smile that I hadn't seen in years. "It smells like lemons," he whispered. Inside, everything was just as he had left it, his books, his posters, his guitar. I had cleaned every corner, prepared his favorite meal, and placed fresh flowers by his bed. For one brief evening, it felt like the nightmare had loosened its grip. After dinner, he sat on the porch beside Felipe, the two of them watching the sky fade to twilight. I listened from the kitchen as their voices drifted through the open window. Soft, steady, almost normal. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe we might survive this. That love might be enough, but healing is never that simple. That night, when the house grew silent and the moonlight crept across his bedroom floor, something returned that we thought was gone forever, and it would remind us that the darkness was never truly gone. The first night of Mike's home visit began with so much hope that I almost forgot to be afraid. He looked peaceful sitting on the porch beside Felipe, his eyes following the fading light as if memorizing every color. The air smelled of lemon blossoms and fresh soil, and for the first time in months, laughter drifted through our home again. After dinner, we watched an old movie together, one he loved as a child. I sat on the couch beside him, occasionally glancing at his face. The medication had softened his sharp edges. His expression was calmer, his tone polite, almost careful. When the movie ended, he stood up and said, "I think I'll go to bed early. It feels good to be home." I smiled, my heart swelling with fragile relief. "That's a good idea, sweetheart. You need rest." He kissed my forehead before going to his room, something he hadn't done since before the hospital. I turned to Felipe, and for the first time in so long, he smiled too. "He's coming back to us, Helen," he said softly. I can feel it. I wanted to believe him. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet. The kind of silence that should feel peaceful but instead felt too still, like the world was holding its breath. I finally dozed off near dawn, dreaming of Mike as a little boy, running through the yard with his toy airplane, laughing under the summer sun. A crash woke me. The sound was sharp, glass shattering, followed by a low thud. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. Felipe was already out of bed, rushing toward the hallway. I followed, fear crawling up my spine. Mike's bedroom door was wide open. The lamp was shattered on the floor, the curtains torn. He was standing near the window, barefoot, staring out into the darkness beyond the lemon tree. "Mike?" I whispered. He didn't turn. "He found me," he said softly. Felipe stepped closer. "Who, son?" "The man in the hat." He waited until I came home. "He's standing under the tree." I looked out the window. Nothing but moonlight and shadows. The branches swayed gently in the night breeze. "There's no one there," I said, trying to sound calm. He shook his head slowly. "You can't see him." "He's not for you." His voice sent a chill through me. Felipe reached for him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Son, you're safe here." "It's just the wind." Mike turned suddenly, his eyes wide, his breath sharp. "Don't touch me." "You're lying again." Before Felipe could react, Mike shoved him back. The force was startling, strong, desperate. Felipe stumbled into the dresser, knocking over a framed family photo. The glass splintered across the carpet. "Mike," I cried, "please listen to me." He clutched his head, trembling. He's saying you're not real. You're not my parents. He says my real family is gone. Tears stung my eyes. We are your family, sweetheart. It's the illness talking, not him. You're safe. He looked at me for a long, empty moment. Then his voice dropped to a whisper. He says you'll never understand. He says you'll have to go before I can be free. Felipe and I exchanged a terrified glance. He took a slow step forward, voice steady. Mike, we love you. We'll help you. Just come sit down. But Mike backed away, shaking his head. You don't understand. If I don't listen to him, he'll hurt you. He turned suddenly, ran toward the door, and bolted down the hallway. We chased after him, our footsteps echoing through the dark house. He ran straight to the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the counter. Mike, no! I screamed. He stood frozen, trembling, the blade shaking in his hand. He says I have to protect you from yourselves. He says, but before he could finish, Felipe moved swiftly, reaching out to grab his wrist. They struggled, a heartbreaking, silent tug between father and son. The knife clattered to the floor. Mike collapsed to his knees, sobbing. I don't want to hurt anyone, he cried. I just want it to stop. I fell beside him, wrapping my arms around him despite his trembling. It's okay, I whispered through tears. We'll fix this. We'll get help. He didn't resist this time. He just wept. Long, deep sobs that came from somewhere beyond words. The next morning, I called Dr. Roberts. He spoke gently, but firmly. He needs to return to St. Luke's immediately. The episode was triggered by environmental memory. The home is both comfort and chaos for him. The hospital is the safest place until we can stabilize him again. I hung up and sat in silence. The coffee on the table went cold. Felipe stared at the floor, his eyes red. How many times are we supposed to lose him? He whispered. I didn't know how to answer. When we told Mike he had to go back, he didn't argue. He just nodded, his face empty, his voice quiet. I knew I wouldn't get to stay. He said it was a trick. The drive back to Dallas felt even longer than the first. No one spoke. The sound of the tires against the road was the only reminder that time was still moving. At the hospital, he walked in willingly. When the nurse asked him to sign his intake papers, he simply said, "This isn't home." After he was gone, I stood outside the building, staring at the high walls that had swallowed my child again. The sky was gray, heavy with rain. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. Felipe stood beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. We'll keep trying, he said. That's all we can do, I nodded. But deep inside, something was breaking. A quiet, painful fracture that comes from too much hope and too many goodbyes. That night, as rain began to fall, I stood by the window of our empty house. The yard was soaked, the lemon tree bending under the storm. For a split second, lightning lit up the sky. And for that brief flash, I could have sworn I saw a dark figure beneath the tree, still and watching. I blinked, and it was gone. In the months that followed, the visits grew fewer and the distance between us widened. But one letter, unexpected and haunting, would soon arrive from the hospital, and with it, a truth I was never ready to face. The months after Mike's return to St. Luke's passed like slow-moving shadows. Days blurred into each other, measured not by sunlight or seasons, but by the envelopes that came in the mail. Medical updates, medication schedules, invoices. Every envelope looked the same. Every word inside felt sterile and rehearsed. Felipe and I stopped talking about hope. It wasn't that we didn't believe in it anymore. It was that speaking it aloud felt like tempting fate. We learned to live in small silences, two people moving through a house that once overflowed with laughter. I filled my days with routines that dulled the ache. I baked for neighbors again, cleaned endlessly, and tended to the lemon tree that had somehow survived every storm. But there were moments when I'd stand on the porch at dusk, looking toward that tree, and feel an unexplainable pull, as if something was still out there, waiting. Then one morning, everything changed. The letter came on a Tuesday, postmarked from Dallas, bearing the hospital's familiar logo. But this one wasn't from the administration. It was addressed in handwriting, my son's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. I tore it open with trembling hands. Dear Mom, I hope you're not mad that I didn't ask before writing this. The doctor said it might help me think clearly again. They give us paper and pencils here, but the pencils don't have erasers, which feels strange. Maybe they don't want us to change our minds once we start writing. I'm getting better, I think. The medicine makes the noise quieter. I can still hear things sometimes, but they're softer now, like whispers from far away. The man in the hat doesn't talk as much. He just stands there sometimes watching, but he hasn't said anything in days. Maybe he's tired too. Dr. Roberts says I need to find a way to tell what's real and what isn't. I told him that's hard because everything looks the same. The floor, the walls, the people. Sometimes I dream that you're here, sitting by my bed, reading me the old story about the wooden toy soldier. I can even smell your perfume when I wake up. But then it fades, and I know it was just a dream. Do you remember when Dad built my treehouse? I used to think it was the highest place in the world. I want to feel like that again, high enough that the shadows can't reach me. Maybe someday when I come home we can rebuild it. Just you and me, love, Mike. I read the letter 3 times before I could breathe again. It wasn't perfect. The sentences wandered, and the words sometimes looped back on themselves. But it was him, my boy. His tenderness, his thoughtfulness, still lived beneath the sickness. When Felipe came home, I showed him the letter. He read it slowly, his lips moving silently over each word. When he finished, he placed it gently on the table and said, "He's trying. That has to mean something." That night, for the first time in months, we slept without nightmares. But the calm didn't last. A week later, another letter arrived. Same handwriting, same envelope. But this one felt different, heavier somehow. I opened it, my heart thudding. Mom, he came back, the man in the hat. He was gone for weeks, but now he talks again. He says I'll never leave this place. He says the doctors can't help me because they don't see what he sees. Sometimes he shows me things. Pictures in the dark. He says you're not safe either because the sickness runs in the blood. And it's waiting for you too. I tried telling Dr. Roberts, but he says I need to challenge the voice. How do I challenge something that knows my name before I speak it? Please don't come this week. He gets angry when you're near. He says if you come, he'll follow you home. I don't want him to find you, Mom. Please stay away until he's gone. Love, Mike. I froze. The letter trembled in my hands. It felt like the paper itself carried his fear. When Felipe came home, I didn't show him right away. He was exhausted. The business had begun to crumble under the weight of all our absences and medical bills. His hair had gone grayer, his shoulders heavier. When I finally handed him the letter, he read it silently, his jaw tightening with every line. Then he tore it in half. "We're not letting this madness dictate our lives anymore," he said sharply. "It's the disease talking, not him." "But it's still him who's afraid," I said quietly. "He's asking for help in his own way." Felipe turned away, his voice rough. "I can't do this anymore, Helen. Every time we take a step forward, something drags us back. It's eating him alive, and us too." We didn't speak for hours after that. The silence between us felt wider than the distance to Dallas. That night, I sat in the kitchen alone, staring at the torn pieces of the letter. I gathered them carefully and taped them back together, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. I couldn't throw away his words. Not when they were the only pieces of him I had left. Days turned into weeks. The hospital sent routine updates, but nothing personal. Then one evening, as I was folding laundry, the phone rang. It was Dr. Roberts. His voice was calm, but carried a weight I recognized instantly. The weight of bad news. "Mrs. Lopez," he began, "I need to inform you that Michael has had another episode." He became agitated and had to be moved to a secured wing for his safety. "He's not hurt, but he's been refusing medication again." My hand went cold around the receiver. What triggered it? There was a pause. "He's been writing things, ma'am. Pages and pages. Drawings, too. Some of the staff say he's become obsessed with a particular image, a dark figure standing by a tree. I pressed a hand to my mouth. A lemon tree? Silence. Then softly, yes, how did you know? I couldn't answer. My knees went weak and the phone slipped from my grasp. The sound of Dr. Roberts calling my name blurred into the hum of the empty house. That night, I burned the taped letter in the sink. I told myself it was to protect us, to end whatever thread still tied him to that shadow. But as the paper curled into ash, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from the darkened yard outside. The next morning, a call from St. Luke's would shatter the last of our peace, not with bad news, but with something far more haunting. Mike had vanished. The call came early in the morning, just as the first light was breaking through the curtains. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before I answered. My voice was still heavy with sleep when I said hello, Mrs. Lopez. The voice was calm but cautious. It was Dr. Roberts. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. I sat up immediately. Is Mike all right? There was a pause. Then, Michael is missing. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Missing? Yes. Sometime during the night, he left his room. We're still trying to determine how. The staff found his bed empty at the morning check. The window in his room was open, and his shoes are gone. We've already notified the police. My body went numb. The world around me faded until all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. He's not stable, I whispered. He can't just walk out. I know, Dr. Roberts said softly. We believe he may have planned this for some time. There were pages missing from his journals. And I need to tell you something else. We found something in his room. What? He hesitated. A drawing? It's a tree, a lemon tree, with a dark figure standing beneath it. The same as before, I couldn't speak. My hands shook as I clutched the phone. He's coming home, I whispered. Dr. Roberts didn't respond, but I heard the quiet exhale that told me he feared the same. Within hours, Felipe and I were on the road to Dallas. The drive was endless, the miles melting into one long blur of asphalt and dread. Felipe didn't speak. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I could feel his guilt as heavily as my own. When we arrived at the hospital, the police were already there, 2 officers talking quietly with staff. They took us into a small room and explained what they knew. At around 2:15 a.m., Mike's door alarm had failed to trigger. Security footage showed him walking down the corridor in his gray sweatshirt and slippers, calm, almost serene. He didn't run or hide. He simply walked out through the side exit that led to the garden. From there, the cameras lost him in the darkness. They had found footprints near the back fence, leading toward the nearby woods. He didn't take anything except a small notebook, the officer said. No wallet, no ID, no medication. Felipe's voice was hoarse when he spoke. You're saying my son walked into the night barefoot in hospital clothes and no one noticed until morning? The officer avoided his gaze. We're doing everything we can, sir. I sat silently, staring at the floor, the words echoing in my mind. He's coming home. They searched for days. Volunteers, police dogs, helicopters. Flyers with Mike's face were posted in every gas station and diner from Dallas to Laredo. I joined the search for as long as my body allowed, walking through brush and dry fields, calling his name into the wind. But he was nowhere. A week later, the search was scaled back. The police told us they believed he might have been trying to make his way home but could have become disoriented or lost. Felipe refused to give up. He kept driving back and forth between the 2 cities, stopping at bus stations, shelters, churches, anywhere someone might have seen him. I stayed home, waiting by the phone. Every night I sat on the porch staring at the lemon tree. The branches moved softly in the wind, casting long shadows across the ground. I found myself whispering prayers into the dark, prayers that mixed with fear and guilt until I couldn't tell them apart. 2 weeks passed before I saw him again. It was late evening. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with violet. I was sitting on the porch half asleep when I heard the creak of the gate. At first I thought I was dreaming. But then I saw him, standing just beyond the porch light, thin and pale, his sweatshirt torn, his hair matted. "Mike?" I whispered, rising slowly. He smiled faintly. "I told you I'd come home." I ran to him, wrapping my arms around him, feeling the sharpness of his bones beneath my hands. "Oh my God, Mike, where have you been?" "We've been looking everywhere." He didn't answer. His body was cold, trembling. I led him inside, sat him by the table, and brought him food and water. He ate slowly, silently, as if every movement was deliberate. Felipe came rushing in moments later, eyes wide with disbelief. How did you get here?" Mike looked up, his voice flat. "I followed the road." "It's easy when you listen." Felipe exchanged a worried glance with me. "We need to call Dr. Roberts," he whispered. Mike's head turned sharply. "No doctors." "Not again." "Son, please," Felipe began gently. "You need help." Mike stood suddenly, knocking over his chair. "I don't need help. I'm fine now." He said I'm free. I froze. "Who said that, sweetheart?" "The man in the hat." My stomach twisted. "Mike, he's not real." "You know that," he smiled, a slow, unsettling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's what you always say." He walked toward the hallway, his steps uneven. "You'll see, Mom. You'll see soon." That night, Felipe and I locked our bedroom door for the first time. I lay awake listening to the creaks of the house, footsteps, whispers, the faint sound of the wind brushing against the windows. Around midnight, I heard the front door open. By the time I reached the porch, he was gone. Only his footprints remained, leading toward the lemon tree. The next morning, we found his hospital bracelet hanging from one of the branches. We called the police again, but this time there were no searches, no headlines, no hope. And as the nights grew longer, the house began to change. Whispers in empty rooms, shadows where none should be. It was no longer just about losing our son. Something else had come home with him. After Mike vanished for the second time, the house fell into a silence that no sound could fill. Felipe stopped sleeping in our bed and moved to the couch. He said it was temporary, that he just needed to be closer to the door, in case Mike comes back. But I knew the truth. He couldn't bear to close his eyes beside me anymore. Not when they always opened to nightmares. The police stopped calling after a week. Dr. Roberts sent a letter expressing sympathy and a referral to a grief counselor. They used the word missing like it was a placeholder, something temporary. But I knew better. Missing means gone, and gone means the kind of emptiness that eats you slowly from the inside. I tried to keep living, but every corner of the house carried him. His room still smelled faintly of soap and paper. His sketches, the ones the hospital mailed back to us, sat in a small box in my dresser. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, though every drawing felt like a glimpse into a place I didn't want to see. One evening, while cleaning, I found a folded paper tucked behind his dresser. It was one of his last drawings, rough pencil marks forming a figure beneath a tree. But this time, the figure wasn't just standing there. Its hand was raised, pointing toward the house. Something about the image unsettled me so deeply that I had to sit down. The detail in the figure's face was faint, but there was something familiar in it, an outline that resembled Felipe. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway, soft, careful, like someone trying not to wake me. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Felipe?" No answer. I stepped out of bed and walked toward the sound. The hallway light flickered weakly. The footsteps stopped near Mike's room. The door was slightly open. A faint rustling came from inside, the sound of paper shifting. "Mike?" My voice cracked. The rustling stopped. When I pushed the door open, the room was empty. The window was closed, the curtains still. The only thing out of place was his sketchbook on the floor, open to a new page. A single sentence was written there in his handwriting. "He's inside now." I felt the air leave my lungs. My first thought was that Felipe was playing some cruel trick, that maybe he had written it, still lost in his grief. But when I asked him the next morning, he swore he hadn't been in Mike's room for days. That was when the house began to change. Small things at first. The lights flickering, doors creaking open on their own, the faint sound of humming at odd hours. Once, while washing dishes, I caught a reflection in the kitchen window, a tall, dark shape standing near the lemon tree. I turned around quickly, but the yard was empty. At night, I'd wake to whispers that sounded like my son's voice, soft, pleading, just beyond the edge of hearing. Sometimes he said my name. Other times he said words I couldn't understand. Felipe refused to believe me. "You're just exhausted," he said, rubbing his temples. "You need rest." But he was changing too. He'd sit on the porch long after midnight, staring at the lemon tree, his cigarette burning down to ash without him noticing. When I called him back inside, he'd look at me strangely as if waking from a dream. "He's out there," he said once. "I can feel him." I tried to pull him away. "Felipe, stop. You're scaring me," he shook his head. "He's not dead, Helen. He's waiting." I didn't know which terrified me more, the thought that my son was gone or the possibility that he wasn't. One night, during a thunderstorm, the whispers grew louder. I woke to the sound of the front door creaking open. Felipe wasn't beside me. Panic flooded through me as I ran down the hall. He was standing barefoot in the yard, soaked by rain, staring up at the lemon tree. Lightning flashed across the sky, and for a moment I thought I saw another shape beside him, tall, cloaked, unmoving. "Felipe." I screamed, running toward him. He turned slowly, eyes glassy. "He's talking to me now," he said calmly. "He says Mike's not lost. He's just in between." I grabbed his arm. "Come inside, please," but he didn't move. His gaze drifted back to the tree. "He says it's your turn to listen." A gust of wind howled through the yard, slamming the door behind me. The air grew heavy, thick, almost electric. For one terrifying second, I thought I heard laughter, deep, distorted, echoing through the rain. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. I pulled Felipe back inside. He collapsed on the couch, trembling. When I brought him a blanket, he didn't look at me. "You saw him too," he whispered. I couldn't answer. For days after that, neither of us spoke about it. We moved through the house like ghosts, avoiding the windows after dark. I kept the curtains drawn, but sometimes I could still feel eyes watching through the glass. The lemon tree began to wilt. Its leaves curled inward, its branches drooped as though weighed down by something unseen. One morning, I found small carvings on its bark, tiny symbols, circles, lines, the same patterns Mike used to draw in his notebooks. That was when I stopped pretending this was just grief. Something had followed him home. Whether it was the sickness or the shadow it created, I didn't know, but I could feel it growing stronger each night, a presence that fed on sorrow, memory, and love. It was in the walls, in the mirrors, in the silence between our words. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard his voice again, closer this time. "Mom," he whispered. "It's cold here." I sat up, heart pounding. "Mike?" "Come to the tree," the voice said. The sound faded as quickly as it came, leaving me trembling and alone. But the scent of lemons, sharp and sweet, filled the air. The next morning, Felipe was gone, and only his footprints remained in the damp soil beneath the lemon tree. That was the day I stopped asking whether this was madness or haunting, because I finally understood it was both. When I woke that morning and saw the bed empty beside me, I knew something was wrong. Felipe never rose before dawn. His shoes were missing, his jacket too. The front door stood slightly open, the cool air of early morning sliding through the crack like a whisper. Outside, the yard was quiet except for the slow rustle of wind through the lemon tree. The soil beneath it was dark and soft from the night's rain. And there they were, footprints. Bare, heavy, leading straight to the tree, stopping where the roots thickened near the base. I called his name once, then again. No answer. The silence that followed was heavier than sound. I remember thinking that maybe he had gone searching for Mike again, as he had done before. But something about those footprints, how deep they sank, how abruptly they ended, told me otherwise. I walked to the tree, trembling. The morning light filtered through the leaves, painting the ground with patches of gold. The smell of lemons was thick, almost suffocating. I knelt beside the roots and noticed something strange, a patch of disturbed soil, freshly turned. I dug with my hands before realizing what I was doing. My fingers hit something solid, a piece of wood. I brushed away the dirt and uncovered what looked like a small wooden box, old and rotted from moisture. Inside were folded papers and a rusted key. The papers were drawings, Mike's drawings. Pages and pages of the same tree, the same dark figure, but with each one the figure came closer to the house. And on the final page, it stood inside, its hand resting on a bed where two shapes slept. Above it, Mike had written 3 words, "He never leaves." I dropped the paper, my hand shaking. That was when I saw the mark carved into the tree trunk. It was faint, almost hidden beneath the bark. But once my eyes caught it, I couldn't look away. A circle surrounded by smaller lines. The same pattern my son had once drawn on his notebooks. A sound rose behind me, a low, almost human sigh carried by the wind. I turned, but no one was there. The yard was empty, yet I could feel something watching. By afternoon, the police arrived after I called them in a panic. I told them my husband was missing, that I'd found signs near the tree. They searched the property, the yard, the nearby road, but found nothing. One officer, a younger man with kind eyes, tried to comfort me. "Ma'am, we'll issue an alert. If he's out there, someone will see him." But his tone carried the same quiet doubt I had heard months earlier when they searched for Mike. That night, I couldn't stay inside. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the tree. The moon hung low, pale and heavy. Every creak of the wood, every shift of wind felt like a whisper. I began to speak aloud, to the air, to whoever might be listening. "If you want me," I said quietly, "leave them alone. Take me instead." The leaves rustled softly as if in answer. Days passed. Felipe did not return. The police stopped calling as the search faded into routine paperwork. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. My world became the yard, the tree, and the house that seemed to breathe at night. Then, one afternoon, the mail arrived. There was a single envelope. No return address, but my name written in Felipe's handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and the rusted key I'd found earlier. The note was short. "Helen, I saw him again. He showed me where the truth is buried. Don't be afraid. You have to finish what started long before us." There was an address written at the bottom, an abandoned farmhouse 20 miles outside of Laredo. I don't know what possessed me, but the next morning I drove there. The road was narrow, winding through dry fields and scattered mesquite trees. The farmhouse sat alone on a small hill, its roof sagging, its windows empty like eyes that had seen too much. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I called his name, my voice echoing off the hollow walls. Then I saw it. A trapdoor near the fireplace, partly hidden beneath broken boards. The lock was old, rusted, and the key in my hand fit perfectly. When I opened it, a gust of cold air rose from below, carrying the faint scent of soil and something older, something almost sweet. A narrow set of wooden steps led down into the dark. I hesitated, then descended. My flashlight cut through the blackness, revealing a small cellar lined with shelves of old boxes and jars. At the far end, something was carved into the wall. A name, Antonio Lopez, my great-grandfather. The man whose madness had haunted our family for generations. Beneath his name were symbols, circles, spirals, and lines that matched the carvings on our tree. And in the center of the wall, half buried in stone, was a small wooden crucifix, its edges blackened with age. My light flickered. The air grew colder. And then I heard it, a voice, faint but unmistakable. "Helen." It wasn't Felipe's voice. It wasn't Mike's. It was older, deeper, a whisper that came from the walls themselves. "You understand now," it said. "He never leaves." I stumbled backward, the flashlight clattering to the ground. The cellar plunged into darkness. When I finally scrambled back up the stairs, gasping for breath, the trapdoor slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the house. Outside, the sun had already set. And there, at the edge of the yard, I saw a figure, tall still, wearing a dark hat. He didn't move. He didn't need to. I knew he was waiting. That night, I realized the curse wasn't just in our blood. It was buried beneath our land. And if I didn't face it, whatever had taken my husband and son would come for me next. I drove home that night without turning on the radio. The road was empty, the world dim except for my headlights cutting through the dark. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly they ached. The voice from that cellar still rang in my head, deep and ancient, whispering words I could no longer tell from my own thoughts. When I reached our house, the porch light flickered like a heartbeat. The lemon tree swayed gently in the wind, its branches heavy with fruit that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The scent filled the air, sharp, sweet, and sickening. I walked to the tree, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The carvings I'd seen before were deeper now, spreading like veins across the bark. The newest one was fresh, the lines wet as if carved that very evening. 3 letters. F. L. Felipe's initials. My knees weakened. I pressed a hand against the trunk and felt a faint vibration, not from the wind, not from the earth, but something alive inside it, something breathing slowly. That night, I didn't go inside. I sat on the porch until the sky began to pale with dawn, half expecting the figure to appear again at the edge of the yard. But he didn't. The silence was worse. It was the kind of silence that listens. When the sun rose, I went into the house. The air was cold and stale, even with the windows closed. I noticed small changes. Chairs slightly moved, doors half open, things I hadn't touched. And in the hallway, on the floor beneath a mirror, I found a footprint. Bare, muddy, unmistakably human. I stared at it until the reflection in the mirror began to ripple. For a split second, I saw movement, a tall shape standing behind me. When I turned, there was nothing. I knew then that whatever haunted our bloodline had followed me home from that cellar. By afternoon, I called Father Luis, our local priest. He had known our family for years, had even baptized Mike when he was a baby. His voice on the phone was cautious but kind. "I'll come tonight," he said. "But Helen, if what you found is truly connected to Antonio's past, you must be prepared. Some things cling not just to land but to guilt." That evening, the sky grew heavy with clouds. When Father Luis arrived, he brought holy water, a wooden cross, and a small Bible so worn the edges were turning to dust. We began with a prayer in the living room, candles flickering around us. The air grew colder as we spoke the words. The house seemed to groan softly as if listening. When we reached the hallway near Mike's room, the temperature dropped suddenly. My breath came out in white clouds. Father Luis looked at me, his eyes dark with worry. "Do you feel it?" I nodded. "It's strongest here." He raised the cross and began to pray louder, his voice firm but trembling at the edges. I closed my eyes and joined him, whispering the prayers I remembered from childhood. The lights flickered, then went out completely. The candles guttered in their holders. From somewhere deep in the house came a sound, not footsteps, but dragging, slow and deliberate. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice strained. The sound grew closer, heavier. I opened my eyes and saw the hallway darken, shadows folding over shadows until it was almost black. Then came a voice, low, calm, familiar. "Helen." I froze. It was Felipe's voice. "Don't listen," Father Luis said sharply. "It's not him," but I couldn't move. The shadow at the end of the hallway shifted, forming into something almost human. I could see the outline of shoulders, the curve of a hat, and 2 faint points of light where eyes should be. "You called me?" it said. Now you must listen. I stepped forward despite the priest's warning. Where is my husband, my son? What have you done to them? The figure tilted its head slowly. They're with me. Always were. I only took what was promised. Father Luis raised his cross higher. In the name of Christ, the lights exploded back to life. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering like smoke. The priest threw holy water forward, chanting louder. The smell of lemons thickened, burning in my throat. Then a voice rose behind me. Smaller, frightened. Mom. I turned. For a moment, just one terrible moment, I saw Mike standing at the end of the hall. Pale, thin, eyes wide with sorrow. You have to let it go, he said. You're keeping it here. I reached for him, tears blurring my sight. Mike, please! The figure behind the priest screamed. Not a sound of pain, but fury. The walls shook, pictures crashed to the floor, the candles blew out all at once. When silence returned, both figures were gone. The house was still. The air was warm again. Father Luis sank to his knees, whispering a final prayer. I helped him stand. His hands trembled. It's not finished, he said weakly. That wasn't banishment. It was warning. He left before midnight, promising to return the next day. I locked the doors, checked every window, and sat alone in the dark. I could still smell lemons, and somewhere deep within the house, I thought I heard whispering again. 2 voices this time. One soft, one low, both calling my name. At dawn, I went back to the tree and found something new carved into its trunk. A message written in my husband's hand. He's not gone. He's waiting below. I waited until sunrise before going outside. The world was still wrapped in fog, soft and pale, as if holding its breath. The lemon tree stood tall and quiet, its branches heavy with fruit that gleamed faintly in the morning light. The words Felipe had carved, "He's not gone. He's waiting below," were etched deep into the bark, fresh enough that sap still glistened along the edges. My hands shook as I traced the letters, my fingertips sticky and cold. I didn't know if I was about to lose my mind completely or finally find it. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't live another day haunted by half-truths and unanswered whispers. If something waited below, I had to see it. I fetched a shovel from the shed. The handle was rough and splintered from years of use. The first dig was hesitant, the second firmer. The earth gave easily at first, the smell of wet soil rising like a sigh. Birds scattered from the branches as if disturbed by what I was doing. The deeper I went, the harder the ground became. Roots twisting thick as wrists, stones wedged like bones. I dug through them anyway, sweat mixing with dirt on my skin. Every strike of the shovel echoed faintly, like sound hitting something hollow. After what felt like hours, the shovel hit wood. I froze. The sound was unmistakable, a dull thud, deep and solid. My breath caught. I cleared the dirt away with my hands until the shape emerged. A large wooden box, old and half-decayed. It looked almost identical to the smaller one I'd found before, only this one was the size of a coffin. My stomach turned. The lid was sealed by rusted nails. I hesitated, staring at it, wondering if Felipe had truly meant for me to find this, or if I was only following the path of madness that had already consumed him and Mike. But then the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of lemons again, and with it came a whisper that brushed against my ear. Finish it. I pried the lid open. The wood splintered beneath my hands. Inside was darkness, then fabric, old and stiff with age. I pulled it aside and nearly dropped the lantern I'd brought. Bones. Not fresh, not even recent. Old bones yellowed with time. A human skeleton curled in on itself, hands bound at the wrists with what looked like leather straps. Around its neck hung a broken crucifix, blackened and cracked. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the shovel for balance. Then I saw it. Something small beneath the rib cage, half buried in dust. a folded piece of parchment, dry and brittle. I lifted it carefully, the paper nearly disintegrating in my fingers. The writing was faded but still legible. The first line read, "Forgive me, Father." The voices would not stop. It was signed, Antonio Lopez, my great-grandfather. I read it twice, the words trembling across the page. He said the light would come from the earth, that I must feed the soil with what I took. I thought it was God. I was wrong. He came wearing a hat, promising peace, whispering that my suffering would end. I buried them all to silence him, but he stayed. He never leaves. I dropped the paper, my body shaking. My great-grandfather hadn't just been haunted. He had killed. Buried them here. And whatever he had invited into our bloodline had never died. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots, gasping for air. The earth seemed to move beneath me, soft and shifting. The whisper came again, clearer this time right beside me. "You opened it. Now we are the same." I spun around, the shovel raised. He was there, the man in the hat, tall, still, as if carved from shadow. His face was obscured, but I could feel him smiling beneath the darkness. The air around him shimmered faintly, distorting the light. "You're not real," I whispered, though the words meant nothing anymore. He tilted his head. "Real is what you remember." I took a step back. "What do you want?" "Nothing you haven't already given." He lifted his hand slowly, pointing toward the open grave. I followed his gesture and froze. The skeleton was gone, not as though its place lay something wrapped in fabric, smaller, newer. My heart stopped when I saw the edge of a familiar gray sweatshirt peeking through. "No," I whispered. "No, no." I dropped to my knees, clawing at the cloth until the face beneath it appeared. Pale. Still. Eyes closed. It was Felipe. His expression was peaceful, almost asleep. His wedding ring still glinted faintly beneath the dirt. I screamed until my voice broke, until the sound was nothing but air. The man in the hat stood silent, watching, unblinking. When the scream finally died in my throat, he spoke again, softly, almost kindly. He wanted to find the truth. "You helped him." Tears blurred my vision. "Why us? Why my family?" "Because you listened." The ground trembled slightly. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't move. My body felt heavy, the air thick with the smell of earth and citrus. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching long and dark over the grave. "He never leaves," he whispered. "But now you do." Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. The air lightened. The tree above me was still again. I knelt there until the sun rose high, the world around me blurring into gold and silence. When I finally looked into the grave again, it was empty. No bones, no body. Only soil, and the shovel lying across it, as if nothing had ever been there. That night, the tree bloomed for the first time in years. Its branches glowed faintly under the moonlight, and as the wind whispered through the leaves, I heard two voices calling my name. One my husband's, the other my son's. That night, I didn't close my eyes. Sleep had long since become a stranger. I sat by the window, staring at the lemon tree glowing faintly beneath the moon. Its blossoms had opened overnight, white and luminous, the scent rich enough to make the air taste sweet. The world outside was still. Too still. It felt like the pause between breaths, the moment before a confession. I don't remember deciding to go outside, only that one moment I was sitting, and the next I was standing barefoot in the yard. The soil was damp beneath my feet, warm despite the cool night air. The moon hung low, almost touching the horizon. The tree stood silent, branches shifting slightly as if waiting for me. I whispered their names. "Felipe, Mike," for a heartbeat, nothing. Then the wind stirred, slow, deliberate. Two of the blossoms fell, landing near my feet, and then I heard it. A voice. No two voices. Mom. Helen. They came from everywhere, above, below, inside my chest. Their tones were soft, layered with something I could not name. Grief, longing, maybe even forgiveness. I fell to my knees beneath the tree. "I'm here," I whispered. I found him. I found where it began. "You did what we couldn't," said Felipe's voice, faint as breath. "It's not your fault," came Mike's. Tears blurred the moonlight. "Then why can't it stop?" I asked. "Why does he still linger?" The leaves rustled. The ground pulsed faintly, a heartbeat rising from deep within the roots. A shadow began to form against the trunk. Tall, familiar. The hat tilted forward, face hidden, the man in the hat. But this time I didn't run. I was too tired for fear. "What are you?" I asked quietly. "A curse? A ghost? A memory?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer. The air around him shimmered with heat. I could feel the weight of every generation in his presence. Antonio's madness, Felipe's faith, Mike's pain, all folded into the same darkness that had devoured them. "You've taken enough," I said. "I'm the last. There's nothing left to feed on." For the first time, he spoke. And the sound was not a whisper, but a deep vibration that trembled through the ground. "There is always one more." I closed my eyes, tears falling freely. "Then take me, but leave them in peace." Silence followed. When I opened my eyes again, the man in the hat was standing closer. I could see the faint edges of his face. Not one face, but many, shifting through time. Antonio, Felipe, Mike, even my own reflection for a moment. "You kept listening," he said. "That is how you keep me alive." Something inside me broke open, not with fear, but clarity. He didn't exist outside us. He wasn't haunting the land. He was haunting the memory. Every generation had listened, had fed him with guilt and grief until he became real, and I was the last one left who could hear. So I stood, wiping the tears from my cheeks, and took a step forward. Then I stopped listening. He tilted his head, almost curious. I reached up and touched the bark of the lemon tree. The carvings were warm beneath my fingers, pulsing like veins. I could feel every whisper, every secret buried in its roots. And then, for the first time, I began to pray, not to banish him, not to ask for miracles, but to forgive. "I forgive Antonio," I said softly, "for what he did, for what he couldn't control." The ground trembled. "I forgive Felipe, for trying to carry it alone." The air grew lighter, the shadow dimming. "And I forgive Mike," I whispered, voice breaking, "for leaving me." The tree shuddered violently, leaves falling in a shower of white. The shadow took a step back, its form flickering. Finally, I placed a hand over my heart. "And I forgive myself." The man in the hat staggered as though struck. His form began to unravel, threads of darkness lifting into the air like smoke. His voice came once more, distant now, fading. "He never leaves." I shook my head. "No, he only stays if we let him." And then, nothing. The air cleared. The scent of lemons softened. The night felt clean for the first time in years. I don't know how long I stood there. When I finally looked down, the carvings on the tree were gone. The bark smooth again, untouched. The soil where I'd dug was sealed. The earth unbroken. The man in the hat was gone. So were the whispers. Only the faint hum of crickets and the soft rustle of wind through the blossoms remained. When the sun rose, I sat on the porch and watched the light touch the yard. The world felt alive again. Quiet, yes, but not empty. A small bird landed on a branch of the lemon tree and began to sing. It was such a simple thing, but it filled my chest with warmth I hadn't felt in years. Inside the house, I found one last note lying on the kitchen table, though I hadn't placed it there. It was written in Mike's handwriting. "You did it. We're free. Take care of the tree." The paper smelled faintly of lemons. I keep it framed on the wall now. The house is smaller, emptier, but peaceful. I still talk to them sometimes, not as ghosts, but as memories that no longer hurt. Every spring, the lemon tree blooms brighter. I bottle its scent in the air and think of all that we survived. Some nights, when the wind moves just right, I still hear faint voices, not whispers of fear, but echoes of laughter. I choose to believe it's them. And sometimes, in the shimmer of moonlight through the branches, I see the outline of a tall man watching from afar. Not dark anymore, but light. Hat tipped, fading slowly with the night. He never leaves, but now, he no longer stays to haunt. He only watches, and I finally know peace. I used to believe our curse began with Antonio's sin, that madness was inherited like blood. But now I understand that it wasn't a curse at all. It was memory waiting for forgiveness. And forgiveness, I learned, is the only thing that truly breaks the chain.